Ancient shipwrights across the globe built nearly identical vessels without ever meeting. This is the mystery of a common maritime blueprint shared by 24 seafaring cultures. By the end of this journey, you will understand the hidden connections that rewrote human history. How did societies separated by vast oceans develop the same sophisticated ship designs? What forgotten knowledge allowed them to navigate the planet with such precision? This exploration reveals a lost chapter of our past where the sea was not a barrier, but a bridge. What does this shared legacy tell you about our deepest human instincts for exploration? This common blueprint was not a single document passed from hand to hand. It was a collection of brilliant solutions, a shared maritime language written in hull shapes and sailcloth. At its core were three universal principles. First, a hull design that could withstand the open ocean's power, often featuring a deep V-shape to cut through waves. Second, a sail configuration that could harness the wind from multiple directions, granting incredible maneuverability far from land. And third, a sophisticated understanding of navigation using the stars, ocean currents, and even the flight paths of birds. We find the same ingenious use of outriggers, those lateral supports, giving stability to canoes in the Philippines and vast voyaging vessels in Polynesia. The triangular lateen sail appears simultaneously on the dhows of Arab traders and the caravels of Portuguese explorers, allowing both to sail efficiently against the wind. This pattern is too specific to be mere coincidence. It points to a deeper truth about our relationship with the sea. The ocean presented the same set of problems to every culture that dared to challenge it, and the most brilliant answers, it seems, were discovered again and again. Now, to grasp the true scale of this phenomenon, we must meet the master builders themselves, the 24 ancient civilizations who all held a piece of this puzzle. These 24 maritime cultures form a global cast of master shipwrights scattered across continents and centuries. In the sun-drenched Mediterranean, the Minoans constructed a powerful thalassocracy, a sea empire, while their successors, the Phoenicians and Greeks, became legendary traders and colonists, pushing their ships to the very edge of the known world. Far to the east, the enigmatic Harappans of the Indus Valley built sturdy craft for their trade with Mesopotamia, followed by the incense traders of the Sabaean kingdom and the vast maritime network of Srivijaya in Southeast Asia. The Pacific Ocean presents another astonishing chapter, beginning with the Lapita people, whose distinctive pottery traces a trail of migration across thousands of miles of open water, a feat later perfected by their descendants, the Polynesians and the Maori, who settled the most remote islands on Earth. Even the Americas played a crucial role, with the Mach navigating the rich coastal waters of Peru and the Taino sailing between the islands of the Caribbean. And from the fjords of northern Europe, the Vikings launched their iconic longships, vessels of both raid and exploration. This incredible diversity makes the underlying similarity of their shipbuilding all the more profound. Each culture brought its own unique spirit to the sea, yet their nautical blueprints whisper a secret of shared principles. So what was the first clue that brought this global pattern to light? The evidence began not with a single discovery, but with a puzzle scattered across the world's coastlines and buried in its ancient soils. The proof of this shared maritime language was pulled from the seabed itself. Near the coast of Turkey, the wreck of a ship from the late Bronze Age, known as the Uluburun shipwreck, lay preserved for over 3,000 years. When archaeologists studied its hull, they found its planks were fastened with a technique called mortise and tenon joints, a method where a protrusion on one piece of wood fits perfectly into a slot on another. This was not a simple or obvious way to build a boat, yet this exact same sophisticated joinery was being used at the very same time by shipwrights in ancient Egypt, a culture separated by a vast sea. This cannot be a simple case of independent invention. It is the same chapter from the same instruction manual, written by hands that never touched. The clues are not only hidden underwater. On sun-baked rocks in Scandinavia and across the Pacific Islands, ancient artists carved petroglyphs of their ships. These stone drawings, created worlds apart, show vessels with the same long, graceful, double-ended design, a shape perfectly engineered to ride over massive ocean swells rather than fight through them. You are looking at the same blueprint drawn on different corners of the globe. These are not vague similarities. They are specific engineering solutions, the kind that only emerge after centuries of accumulated seafaring wisdom. So why would cultures with no possible contact solve these complex nautical puzzles in the exact same way? The answer may lie not in the cultures themselves, but in the relentless, unchanging nature of the sea. The ocean does not negotiate. Its currents and winds are a global system of highways and obstacles, indifferent to the cultures that dare to sail them. This is the key to our mystery. The monsoon cycles of the Indian Ocean and the relentless trade winds of the Pacific were not local weather patterns. They were planetary forces that every ambitious seafaring culture had to master. To sail the Mediterranean was to face challenges eerily similar to those in the South China Sea. The solution was not a shared secret, but a shared response to an identical teacher. The sea itself, through a process of relentless natural selection, favored only the most efficient designs. A hull too flat would be pummeled by waves. A sail too rigid would leave a ship stranded in a calm or torn apart in a storm. This is why the lateen sail appears on Arab dhows and Portuguese caravels. It was the definitive answer to a global question: how to capture the wind from an angle and sail efficiently against it. The sea tested every innovation, and only the best designs survived to be copied and refined across generations. This evolutionary pressure explains the uncanny similarities, but it does not diminish the achievement. It simply means that the sea, in its vast and impartial wisdom, guided all of its students toward the same brilliant conclusions. To build these masterpieces of naval engineering, these cultures turned to the forests and fields of their homelands, discovering that the very materials they used also spoke a universal language. The world's great shipwrights all faced the same material puzzle. From the cedars of Lebanon to the mighty oaks of northern Europe and the dense teak forests of Southeast Asia, they each sought out the strongest, most flexible woods that could endure a lifetime of saltwater and sun. These were not arbitrary choices. Cedar's natural oils repelled wood boring worms, oak's dense grain could withstand immense pounding from waves, and teak's silica content made it nearly impervious to rot. They were solving the same engineering problem with the same perfect materials, discovered an ocean apart. This shared material science extended far beyond timber. For lashing their vessels together, cultures surrounded by coconut palms turned to coir, a rope made from coconut husks that actually strengthens when soaked in seawater. In regions without coconuts, they cultivated hemp and other tough fibers to create cordage of identical strength and purpose. And to seal their masterpieces against the relentless ocean, they all discovered the power of natural sealants. They boiled pine sap into tar, tapped trees for sticky resins, and mixed concoctions of oils and waxes. This was a universal toolkit for making wood float and survive. The properties of these resources were like a set of instructions from nature itself, guiding different cultures toward the same brilliant solutions. A flexible wood suggested a certain hull shape. A strong, elastic rope demanded a specific lashing technique. The materials did not just allow the ships to be built, they whispered the final design. So how did these master builders translate their materials and blueprints into floating reality? The answer lies in the silent, rhythmic work of the shipyard, where abstract principles became solid, seaworthy craft. The hull is the heart of any ship, its very soul carved from wood and shaped by the sea. Across our 24 civilizations, a remarkable pattern emerges in this foundational element, the widespread adoption of the V-shaped hull. This was not a minor detail, but a profound engineering choice. A flat-bottomed boat is stable in calm, shallow waters, but in the open ocean, it slams against each wave, punishing both the vessel and its crew. The V-shape, however, is a blade. It slices through the water, rising over swells with a graceful, rolling motion that conserves energy and protects the ship's structure. This was not a style that could be copied through casual observation. It was a hard-won lesson from the ocean itself, a lesson learned independently from the North Atlantic to the South Pacific. This principle of convergent evolution extends to another critical innovation, the keel. Think of the keel as the ship's backbone, a long, rigid timber running along the bottom of the hull. For the Vikings, it gave their longships the strength to cross treacherous seas and the bite to hold a steady course against a side wind. In Polynesia, the massive voyaging canoes, though outwardly different, relied on the same fundamental principle integrated into their deep hulls for directional stability. The keel was a universal answer to a universal problem: how to stop a ship from being pushed sideways by the wind, a force that could send a vessel hopelessly off course into the endless blue. This was not a technology that was traded. It was a solution repeatedly born from necessity. The physics of water and wind are constant, a global set of rules that every successful shipwright was forced to obey. They all arrived at the same brilliant conclusion because, in the harsh laboratory of the ocean, it was the only conclusion that worked. Now, with these masterfully shaped hulls cutting through the water, the next question becomes one of power. How did these ancient mariners capture the invisible force of the wind itself to propel their vessels across the globe? The sail was the engine of the ancient world, a canvas wing that turned wind into motion. Yet the story of its evolution is a tale of parallel revolutions. Across the globe, mariners were not just hoisting cloth, they were conducting their own experiments in aerodynamics, and they kept arriving at the same two brilliant answers. The first was the square sail, a powerful but simple design used by the Egyptians on the Nile, the Romans in the Mediterranean, and the Vikings in the North Atlantic. Its strength was in its directness. When the wind was at your back, this sail acted like a giant hand, pushing the ship forward with immense force. It was the perfect engine for following well-known trade routes and riding predictable currents. But the sea is rarely so accommodating. What happened when the wind was against you or coming from the side? This is where the second revolution occurred, an innovation so elegant it seems to have sprung up everywhere at once. The triangular lateen sail was the ancient world's master key to the wind. By mounting it on a long, angled spar, sailors could position it to capture the wind from the side, creating a difference in pressure that literally pulled the ship forward. This allowed Arab dhows, Mediterranean caravels, and Indian Ocean traders to do the seemingly impossible, to sail efficiently into the wind, zigzagging their way to destinations that would have been unreachable with a simple square rig. The fact that this complex aerodynamic solution appeared among cultures separated by entire oceans is staggering. It was not a copied design, but a shared epiphany, a universal moment of understanding how to dance with the air itself. Yet a perfect ship with a perfect sail is a ghost ship without the one element that gives it purpose and direction, the mind of the navigator. The night sky was their unchanging map, a celestial dome of fixed points that guided mariners across trackless waters. For the Polynesian voyager, the path to a new island was not written on parchment, but etched in the rising and setting of specific stars. They used a star compass, a mental construct dividing the horizon into 32 houses, each marked by a bright star. When the star Arcturus rose directly ahead, you were on course for the Hawaiian Islands. When the Southern Cross stood upright in the heavens, you were steering true south. This was not unique to the Pacific. Phoenician traders sailing by night across the Mediterranean kept the North Star, Polaris, fixed on their left shoulder to maintain a westerly course. They knew that the height of this star above the horizon was a direct measure of their latitude, their north-south position on the globe. This shared celestial language reveals a profound truth. The heavens presented the same navigational solutions to every culture that looked up. The North Star for the north, the Southern Cross for the south, the sun's arc for east and west. These were universal constants in a shifting world. But what happened when clouds obscured the stars, or when a vessel sailed for days without a single glimpse of the sky? This celestial knowledge was only one part of a much deeper, more intuitive conversation with the ocean itself. The true navigator saw with more than just his eyes. He felt the ocean's rhythm through the wooden planks beneath his feet, interpreting a language of swells and currents. Both Polynesian and Norse sailors mastered the art of reading the sea's subtle heave. A long, gentle swell rolling consistently from one direction spoke of distant weather systems, while a sudden, confused pattern of smaller waves rebounding could signal an unseen island over the horizon, its mass interrupting the deep ocean currents. This was not magic, but a profound sensory science. They watched the sky for winged guides. A bird flying steadily out to sea at dusk was likely heading for a roost on land, giving a sailor a living compass. A tired seabird circling the ship meant open water for days, but the sudden appearance of land-nesting species promised that solid earth was near. Even the color of the water told a story, shifting from the deep indigo of the abyss to the greenish tint of a continental shelf, or the muddy brown of a great river's outflow. This deep ecological knowledge, passed from elder to apprentice in chants and stories, formed a universal navigation system built on pure observation. It was a shared human intuition, a sailor's wisdom that turned the entire natural world into a map. This mastery of the sea did more than just lead to new lands. It wove the first threads of a global network, connecting worlds that did not yet know each other's names. A Phoenician merchant would never see the shores of Java, and a Javanese sailor would never walk the docks of ancient Rome, yet their worlds were connected by a slow, relentless current of commerce. While the ocean taught the same harsh lessons to every culture, we cannot dismiss the possibility of whispers traveling along the trade routes that crisscrossed the ancient world. The Silk Road is famous, but its maritime counterpart was just as vital, a sprawling web of sea lanes that moved more than just spices and silk. A single ship, loaded with goods from a dozen lands, was a floating library of ideas. A Roman coin could travel from the hand of a merchant in Alexandria to a trader in India, and then onward on a local vessel to a port in Southeast Asia. With that coin came stories and perhaps a crude drawing scratched in the sand, a sailor boasting about the clever new sail that let his ship tack against the wind. This was not a coordinated transfer of technology, but a slow, diffuse seepage of maritime best practices. The Indian Ocean was the perfect conduit for this kind of exchange. For centuries, it was a bustling aquatic highway where Roman, Arab, Indian, and later Chinese merchants all mingled in the same cosmopolitan ports. A shipwright in Sri Lanka might see the unique hull design of an Arab dhow and adapt its strongest feature for his own vessels. A few generations later, that improved design could be carried by Malay traders all the way to the islands of Indonesia. This slow-motion sharing could create the illusion of a common blueprint emerging from nowhere, when in reality, it was a global game of telephone played out over centuries, where only the most effective innovations survived the journey. Consider the spread of the lateen sail itself. While its fundamental principle may have been independently discovered, its rapid adoption across the Indian Ocean and into the Mediterranean suggests a different story, one of observation and adaptation. A sailor in Oman sees the sail on a vessel from India and recognizes its superior performance. He replicates it. A Greek merchant observes it on an Omani ship and does the same. Within a few human lifetimes, a revolutionary technology becomes standard equipment across an entire ocean, not because a single culture commanded it, but because it simply worked too well to be ignored. So, was it all just shared physics and slow cultural diffusion, or does the evidence point to something even more profound lying beneath the waves? The Outrigger canoe is a perfect snapshot of our entire mystery floating on the water. Its design is deceptively simple, a main hull connected by wooden beams to a smaller, parallel float. This single innovation transformed a tippy canoe into a stable platform capable of crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. We see its most famous form in the vast voyaging canoes of the Polynesians, vessels that carried entire families, their plants, and their animals to populate the Pacific. Yet we find a nearly identical design in the ancient Tamil catamarans of India's coast, and again in the canoes used by the Taino and Carib people of the Caribbean. These cultures were separated by the entire span of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans, so how did the same brilliant idea appear in three different corners of the world? The most compelling explanation for the Polynesian and Tamil designs is one of shared ancestry. The Austronesian peoples, originating in Southeast Asia, began their incredible migration eastward more than 3,000 years ago. They carried the Outrigger concept with them as a piece of their cultural toolkit, a proven solution that allowed them to push further and further into the unknown Pacific. This was cultural diffusion on an epic scale, an idea traveling with its people, but the Caribbean presents a different puzzle. There is no evidence of a migration from Southeast Asia to the Americas that could have brought the Outrigger. Here we see the other force at work: parallel innovation. The indigenous peoples of the Caribbean faced the same fundamental challenge as the Polynesians: the need for a stable fishing and trading vessel in often turbulent island waters. Confronted with identical problems of physics and environment, they arrived at the same elegant answer: a lateral float to prevent capsizing. This one invention, therefore, tells two stories. In the Pacific, it is the story of an idea carried across the waves. In the Caribbean, it is the story of an idea born from the waves. This is the complex heart of our mystery, where shared heritage and independent genius become almost impossible to untangle. But building a stable vessel was only the first step. How did these ancient mariners, in their Outrigger canoes and longships, actually find their way to a speck of land in an ocean that stretched to the horizon in every direction? The ocean offered no markets and no second chances. A voyage lasting weeks or months was a moving island, a self-contained world that had to carry every necessity for survival within its wooden hull. For all 24 of our seafaring cultures, this logistical nightmare forced the development of an almost identical survival manual. The first and most vital challenge was fresh water. A human can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. The solution from the Mediterranean to the Pacific was the same: large, sealed containers. The Phoenicians used giant clay amphorae, their narrow necks and rounded bodies designed to be stable in a ship's hold. In Polynesia, voyagers used hollowed-out gourds and carefully sealed bamboo tubes, materials provided by their own environment to solve the same universal problem. Storing enough liquid for dozens of people for a month or more was a monumental task, and every culture mastered it through similar ingenuity. Food was the next great puzzle. They needed calories that would not spoil, and so, around the world, ships' larders converged on the same brilliant, simple answers. Dried fish, salted and hardened by the sun, became protein that could last for seasons. Hardtack, a simple biscuit of flour and water baked until rock hard, was the universal bread of the sea, edible for years if kept dry. And the humble coconut was a marvel of natural packaging, providing hydration from its milk, rich calories from its meat, and even fiber from its husk. But the most profound common strategy was the decision to bring life itself on these journeys. The practice of carrying live animals, particularly chickens and pigs, was widespread. These creatures were a walking larder, providing eggs and eventual meat. Yet their purpose was even grander. These animals were not just meals, they were colonists. A pregnant pig or a clutch of chickens was a seed population, the foundation for a new farm on a new island, ensuring the community could not just arrive, but truly live and grow. This shared knowledge of how to sustain life at sea was the final, crucial piece of the maritime blueprint. It transformed a ship from a mere vehicle into a portable ecosystem, a life raft carrying the very seeds of civilization across the endless blue. The most profound evidence for this shared blueprint is written not on the water, but on the land itself. It is the story of new worlds born from the sea. With their reliable ships and sophisticated navigation, cultures did not merely explore, they transplanted entire civilizations. The Polynesian expansion is perhaps the most stunning example. Using their vast double-hulled canoes, they carried families, tools, and the very plants and animals of their homeland, settling remote islands from Hawaii to Rapa Nui, all the way to Aotearoa, what we know as New Zealand. Each new settlement was a deliberate act of creation, made possible by a maritime technology that turned the greatest ocean on Earth into a familiar pathway. Far to the north, the Vikings enacted the same story in a different sea. Their iconic longships, with their shallow drafts and strong keels, allowed them to push into the unknown Atlantic. They reached and settled the empty shores of Iceland, established a fragile foothold on the icy coasts of Greenland, and even made landfall in North America, a continent entirely separate from their European world. Meanwhile, in the ancient Mediterranean, the Phoenicians used their own mastery of the sea to weave a network of trading colonies, from Carthage in North Africa to ports in Spain and Sicily, spreading their culture and influence across the known world. In every case, the same pattern holds. The common maritime blueprint was the essential key, the single tool that unlocked the possibility of crossing the horizon and planting a new flag on a distant shore. This shared capacity for exploration and colonization, spanning the globe and arising independently, is the ultimate testament to the power of this universal technology. Yet some of the most compelling clues to this ancient connection are not found on the waves or in new settlements, but deep within the earth, waiting to be uncovered. The same ships that sailed the ancient seas also sailed through the dreams of their people, immortalized in paint and poetry. On a Greek vase from 2,500 years ago, a warrior steps onto a vessel with a gracefully curved stern, a design built for the open sea. Centuries earlier and a world away, the ancient Indian text, the Rig Veda, describes the ship of the gods with a hull that is well-ribbed and swift-moving, a description that would fit the Greek ship perfectly. These are not just coincidences of design, but echoes of a shared maritime soul. The Norse sagas, filled with the deeds of Eric the Red and Leif Erikson, recount voyages across the North Atlantic to Greenland and Vinland, guided by the sunstone and the reading of waves. At the same time, but in the vast Pacific, Polynesian oral histories preserved in chants tell of the great navigator Hokulea and his voyage to discover new islands, guided by the very same principles, the stars and the swell patterns. These stories, separated by an entire planet, are bound by a common thread, a profound reverence for the ocean and the wooden vessel that was both home and hero. The cold timber of a shipwreck tells us how they built, but these myths and artworks tell us why they sailed. They give voice to the universal human spirit of adventure, the irresistible pull of the horizon that transcended culture and continent. This collective memory, etched in story and art, points to a deep, shared experience of the sea. It makes you wonder if these parallel traditions are not just similar reactions to the ocean, but distant reflections of a much older, forgotten source, a common ancestor from a time when the world's waters were first challenged. This notion of a forgotten teacher brings us to one of the most alluring and controversial ideas, the Atlantis hypothesis. Could a single, advanced maritime civilization have been the original source of this global blueprint? The theory suggests that long before recorded history, a seafaring people, perhaps the real-world inspiration for Plato's sunken kingdom, traversed the world's oceans. According to this view, they were the master instructors, seeding the coasts of every continent with the secrets of shipbuilding and navigation before their own homeland vanished beneath the waves. The sudden, seemingly inexplicable appearance of sophisticated vessels in places like ancient Egypt and the Indus Valley is then framed not as independent genius, but as the legacy of this lost mother culture. It is a romantic and powerful narrative, answering our deep need for a singular, epic origin story. Yet for all its appeal, the scientific community largely dismisses this idea. The overwhelming criticism is a profound lack of evidence. Where are the ruins of this global maritime empire? Where is the trail of its distinctive artifacts, its unique pottery, or its written language scattered across the world? If such a culture existed and interacted with so many others, archaeology should be drowning in its footprints. Instead, we find only the quiet, parallel evolution of technology. The academic consensus points not to a single fallen teacher, but to a classroom of brilliant students, each working on the same difficult problem set provided by the ocean. They were not copying from a central board, but arriving at the same A+ answers because the laws of physics and the challenges of the sea permitted no other outcome. The truth, it seems, is both more complex and more democratic than any sunken continent. It is a story of human ingenuity rising again and again to meet a universal challenge. The ocean's classroom had no single teacher, only a relentless universal curriculum. This is the core of the skeptical, academic view, a perspective that finds the true explanation not in lost continents or ancient contact, but in the unforgiving logic of physics and survival. The dominant scholarly consensus dismisses the need for a shared origin story. Instead, it champions a powerful concept, convergent evolution. Just as sharks and dolphins, separated by millions of years of evolution, both developed streamlined bodies to move efficiently through water, so too did ancient shipwrights arrive at the same hull shapes, sail types, and navigation methods. They were all solving for the same variables: wind pressure, water resistance, and structural integrity. The V-shaped hull was not a copied design. It was the inevitable result of trying to move a wooden structure through a fluid medium with the least amount of effort and the greatest chance of survival. The lateen sail was not a secret passed between cultures. It was the aerodynamic answer to the question of how to generate forward force from a side wind. In this view, the common blueprint is an illusion, a pattern created by countless separate cultures, all taking a multiple-choice test where only one answer, the most efficient one, resulted in a successful voyage. This explanation credits human ingenuity not with copying a master plan, but with independently discovering the same fundamental truths of hydrodynamics and meteorology again and again across the globe. It suggests that the sea, in its vast impartiality, was the only true instructor. But if this blueprint was truly universal, then its most telling evidence might be found not in the similarities, but in the fascinating and deliberate differences. What did each culture choose not to share? What unique fingerprints did they leave on their vessels, revealing their distinct spirits and the specific shores they called home? A Viking longship, carved with snarling dragon heads to strike terror into coastal villages, could not be more different from a Polynesian voyaging canoe, its hulls adorned with sacred symbols to appease the gods of the ocean. Both vessels were masterpieces of naval engineering, born from the same universal principles of hull shape and sail power, yet they were expressions of entirely separate worlds. This is the crucial distinction in our mystery. The shared maritime blueprint was a language of pure function, a set of grammatical rules for surviving the sea. But the stories each culture told with that language, the poetry they built upon that foundation, were uniquely and brilliantly their own. The religious life of a ship varied dramatically. For the Phoenicians, a vessel was a practical tool of commerce, while for the ancient Egyptians, the solar barge was a divine vessel carrying the sun god Ra himself through the underworld. The social structure aboard was another point of stark divergence. A Viking crew was a brotherhood of warriors, their authority earned through strength and reputation. On a large Polynesian voyaging canoe, the hierarchy was intricate, with a sacred navigator holding a position akin to a priest, his decisions guided by ancestral chants and celestial wisdom. Even the core purpose of voyaging split along cultural lines. The Norse were often raiders and explorers, seeking wealth and new land to farm. The Polynesians were deliberate colonists, transporting an entire ecosystem to create a new home. The Minoans built a thalassocracy, an empire sustained by trade and control of the sea lanes. The blueprint provided the physical means to cross the water, but the human heart provided the reason. This rich cultural divergence is actually the strongest proof that we are not looking at the legacy of a single, lost teacher. If one civilization had disseminated all this knowledge, we would expect to see a much more uniform culture of the sea, similar rituals and parallel mythologies. Instead, we find a common toolkit used to build 1,000 different dreams. So how do we move beyond theory and truly test these ideas of parallel invention versus ancient contact? The answer lies in a modern voyage, a daring attempt to sail the ancient routes using only the tools of the past. The true test of these ancient blueprints came not from dusty artifacts, but from the salt spray of the open ocean. In the 1970s, a bold experiment was launched, a project known as the Hokulea. This was a full-scale, double-hulled voyaging canoe, built not from ancient plans, but from the collective memory of Polynesian oral traditions and the study of historical design. Its mission was audacious, to sail from Hawaii to Tahiti using only the stars, the swells, and the flight of birds for guidance, just as the ancestors had done. The success of that first voyage was a thunderous answer to generations of doubt. It proved that the Polynesian navigation system was not myth, but a precise and repeatable science, capable of guiding a vessel across 2,500 miles of trackless Pacific to a pinpoint destination. At the same time, far to the north, another replica was challenging the waves. The Viking ship Gaia, a meticulously reconstructed longship, embarked on its own journey across the treacherous North Atlantic. With its single square sail and deep keel, it faced the same gales and swells that tested Leif Erikson 1,000 years earlier. These were not leisurely cruises, they were rigorous trials that generated hard data. Researchers logged everything, from how many degrees the vessel slipped sideways in a crosswind to how many sea miles it could cover in a day with a following breeze. They discovered that these ancient designs were not just adequate, they were brilliantly optimized. A Polynesian canoe with its twin hulls offered a stable platform that could carry a heavy load of colonists and supplies for a long voyage. A Viking longship with its shallow draft could slide onto a beach for a raid or exploration without needing a deep water port. These replicas provided tangible proof that the shared maritime blueprint was a supremely effective global operating system for exploration. This hands-on research does more than validate the past. It forces us to reconsider the very pace of ancient history. If a replica Viking ship could cross the Atlantic in a matter of weeks, how many such voyages lost to time actually occurred? If the Hercules could find a tiny island with nothing but the stars, how many other islands were settled not by accident but by deliberate, skilled navigation? The success of these voyages shrinks the ancient world, turning vast, intimidating oceans into familiar highways. It brings the past to life not as a static display in a museum, but as a living, breathing achievement of human courage and intellect. So what does this mean for us today in a world of satellites and GPS? This ancient knowledge offers a profound lesson in resilience. The ghosts of ancient shipwrights are whispering in the ears of modern engineers. The very principles that guided a Polynesian voyaging canoe or a Phoenician trader are now being rediscovered in the quest for sustainable maritime technology. Consider the hull shape. For centuries, the deep V-shaped hull was the only design that could reliably conquer the open ocean. Today, that same hydrodynamic principle is being refined with computer modeling to create super-efficient yacht hulls that slice through waves with minimal energy expenditure, a direct lineage from the keels of the past. The most profound revival, however, is happening above the waterline with the sail. The ancient Latin sail, that brilliant triangular wing, is the great-grandfather of the high-tech rigid sails now being tested on massive cargo ships. These modern iterations use the same fundamental aerodynamic principle, capturing wind power to dramatically reduce fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. We are witnessing a full-circle moment where the oldest form of maritime propulsion is becoming the most promising solution for a cleaner future. This is not mere nostalgia, it is a recognition that the ancient blueprint achieved a profound harmony with natural forces. Those shipwrights worked with the wind and water, not against them, creating designs of breathtaking efficiency because they had to. There were no fossil fuels to bail them out. Their survival depended on elegance and intelligence, a lesson we are urgently relearning. This historical insight fundamentally reshapes our view of human history. It suggests that our ancestors were not primitive wanderers stumbling across the globe, but sophisticated system thinkers who mastered their environment with a wisdom we are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Their legacy is more than just ship designs. It is a timeless manual for resilience, written not on paper, but in the very way they moved across the world. This common blueprint forces a profound shift in how we see our own past. For generations, the story of ancient civilizations was taught as a series of isolated experiments, brilliant but separate cultures blooming in their own protected river valleys or behind mountain ranges. The idea of the Phoenicians in their Mediterranean bubble, the Polynesians in their vast Pacific world, and the Vikings in their northern fjords, all developing in splendid isolation, feels intuitive. Yet the maritime evidence shatters this comforting narrative. The nearly identical solutions to shipbuilding and navigation point to a different reality, a world humming with subtle, indirect connections. It was not the rapid globalization of today, but a slow, deep current of exchange, a globalism measured not in internet seconds, but in human generations. A revolutionary ship design discovered in one corner of the world could, across centuries, ripple outward through trade, migration, and chance encounters, influencing shipwrights an ocean away who never knew its origin. This transforms our map of history. The oceans were not empty, impenetrable voids on the edges of civilization. They were the planet's original information superhighways, carrying not just spices and silks, but the very seeds of technological progress. A single merchant ship was a floating university, its hull shape and rigging a lecture on naval engineering for any observant eye in a foreign port. This slow-motion sharing of best practices means we can no longer view any ancient seafaring culture as a completely independent entity. They were all participants in a vast, diffuse, and ancient network, linked by the universal language of the sea. So where does this leave our original mystery? If these cultures were so indirectly connected, why does the evidence still feel so perfectly aligned? The lingering question is one of balance. How much of this common blueprint was born from the relentless, impartial teacher of ocean physics, and how much was carried on the slow, invisible currents of human contact? We are left staring at the waves, wondering if we are seeing the result of countless separate geniuses all acing the same test, or the faint, enduring echo of a conversation that began thousands of years ago. A whispered exchange between shipwrights whose names are lost to time, but whose brilliant ideas still sail on. The evidence for a shared maritime language is compelling, yet its origins remain one of history's great unresolved debates. Was there ever a moment of direct contact between a Roman merchant galley and a Maya trading canoe? The sheer improbability of such a meeting is staggering, yet the question lingers. The precise pathways of specific technologies are equally elusive. We can trace the Latin sails movement across the Indian Ocean, but did it spread through peaceful trade? Was it copied from a captured vessel? Or was its principle simply so brilliant that it sparked into existence in multiple places at once? Each new archaeological discovery fuels these discussions. A recently analyzed shipwreck in Southeast Asia might reveal construction techniques that predate their supposed invention in the Mediterranean, forcing historians to redraw their maps of technological exchange. Genetic studies of ancient crops and animals add another layer, revealing how species from different continents crossed oceans long before the age of European exploration. These are not just academic exercises, they challenge our fundamental understanding of human isolation. Are we grossly underestimating the volume and range of transoceanic travel in antiquity? Perhaps the oceans were far busier with small, unrecorded voyages than our history books have ever acknowledged. This historical puzzle, therefore, transcends mere ship design. It carries a profound symbolic weight for our modern, interconnected world. It suggests that the human drive to explore and connect is so powerful that it can create parallel realities, building the same bridges across the water even when no physical bridge exists. The common blueprint is more than a collection of ancient techniques. It is a testament to a shared human instinct, a deep-seated need to reach beyond the horizon and find our reflection in the distant shores of others. This shared dream of the sea is carved into the very soul of human culture. From the grand funeral ships buried with Egyptian pharaohs, intended to carry them to the afterlife, to the fragile reed boats depicted in Mesopotamian art, the vessel transcends its physical form. It becomes a universal archetype for life's journey itself. In Norse mythology, the sun and moon were chased across the sky by wolves, but they traveled in divine chariots that some scholars interpret as symbolic ships navigating the celestial ocean. For the ancient Greeks, the constellation Argo Navis immortalized Jason's legendary quest for the Golden Fleece, a story etched in the stars as a permanent reminder of humanity's exploratory spirit. This symbolism is not confined to the West. In the Pacific, the Polynesian creation chant, the Cumulipo, describes the genesis of the world as a process emerging from the sea, with life itself beginning as a kind of cosmic canoe. The ship is a symbol of survival against impossible odds, a tiny, ordered world of wood and hope adrift in a vast, chaotic universe. It represents the ultimate act of faith, casting off from the safety of the shore in pursuit of something more, whether that is a new island, a trade route, or a deeper understanding of the gods. The profound truth is that these 24 cultures did not just independently invent similar boats, they independently arrived at the same powerful metaphor. Their shared maritime blueprint was the physical manifestation of a shared human dream, a collective yearning to navigate the great unknowns, both of the external world and the internal self. The legacy of these ancient mariners is not merely a collection of nautical techniques preserved in museums. It is the very world we live in today, a world shaped by their courage to follow the horizon. Every time we look at a global map, we are seeing the direct result of their accumulated voyages. The languages we speak, the foods we eat, the interconnected societies we call home, all were made possible by those first, daring acts of maritime exploration. Their legacy is the undeniable proof that humanity's greatest achievements have always stemmed from connection, from the brave decision to build a ship and reach out, rather than to stay safely on the beach. They understood in their bones that the sea was not a barrier, but a pathway to a larger existence. Their story challenges us to consider what our own shared blueprints might be. What universal dreams and tools are we creating today that will define our species for generations to come? Their legacy is written in the very geography of our global society. Every time goods move across an ocean in a container ship, they are following routes first mapped by Phoenician traders and Polynesian navigators. The complex supply chains that bring fruit to your table in winter or fuel to your local station are the direct descendants of those ancient maritime networks, scaled up by technology but identical in their fundamental purpose: to connect distant human communities. Our modern understanding of the planet as a single, interconnected system began not with satellites, but with the accumulated knowledge of sailors who learned to read the stars and the currents. They gave us the first true glimpse of a global community. This shared maritime blueprint was more than a set of instructions for building ships. It was the original operating system for globalization. It enabled the exchange of not only goods, but also ideas, religions, technologies, and art, weaving the separate threads of human culture into the rich, complex tapestry we know today. The courage required to push a wooden boat over the horizon into the unknown is a timeless human quality. It is the same spirit that drives scientific discovery and space exploration today. We look back at these 24 civilizations not as ancient history, but as kindred spirits. Their story of overcoming immense physical barriers through sheer ingenuity and cooperation is a powerful mirror for our own time, as we face global challenges that can only be solved by working together. The sea taught them that we are all connected, a lesson we are still learning. Their voyage never truly ended, it just changed form, and we are all still riding the waves they first dared to challenge. We have sailed across millennia and oceans, exploring the remarkable theory that 24 ancient maritime civilizations shared a common blueprint. We have walked the shores where their ships were built and stood on the decks of their modern replicas, feeling the wind they captured and the waves they conquered. The evidence is undeniable, from the similar hull shapes pulled from different seabeds to the same stars that guided their prows toward new horizons. These cultures, separated by continents, were all answering the same relentless exam posed by the ocean, and they all arrived at the same brilliant answers. This journey reveals a profound truth that humanity, in its quest to explore and connect, often finds the same elegant solutions to the grand challenges of nature. The oceans, which seem to divide us, have also united us through a shared history of ingenuity. The legacy of those 24 seafaring cultures is the world we live in today, a planet forever connected by their courage. Thank you for joining this exploration. If this mystery of our shared past captivated you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of history.